I gave this company 18 years of my life, built their analytics empire from nothing, and yesterday, HR sat across from me, eyes cold, and said, "Accept a junior role or resign. No warning, no severance, just a clean swap for the CEO's son. Fresh MBA, zero experience." I walked out shaking, not from fear, but from the realization they had no idea what they just set in motion. Stay with me, because what happened next turned that humiliation into the most satisfying professional revenge of my life. If you've ever been underestimated, subscribe and tell me your story below. The meeting lasted less than 12 minutes, but it shattered 18 years of my life. Lydia Crane from HR didn't look at me once, her attention fixed on a printout she'd clearly rehearsed. "Zoe, your position is being restructured. You may accept the new junior analyst role or submit your resignation." Her voice was clinical, detached, as if discussing inventory, not a person who'd built half the company's data infrastructure. I remember staring at the veins on her wrist as she spoke, blue lines pulsing under skin that didn't seem to know empathy. My throat tightened when I tried to respond. "May I have 24 hours to decide?" The words felt too small for the weight in my chest. She nodded without emotion and slid the paperwork across the table like a receipt. I walked out with it trembling in my hands. The hallway outside felt colder than usual, even under the same fluorescent lights. People passed by with forced smiles, avoiding my eyes, pretending not to know. In that moment, humiliation didn't burn. It numbed. It was the quiet awareness that I had become invisible in a company I had once built from the ground up. I had started when our analytics division was 3 people working in a converted storage room. I stayed through budget freezes, through 2 a.m. system crashes, through the years of half-eaten dinners and canceled vacations. Every urgent deadline had cost me something personal, and yet I always told myself it was worth it because I was building something permanent. But permanence is an illusion. When I got to my car, I sat still for nearly 10 minutes. I couldn't start the engine. My reflection in the windshield looked like a stranger's face, tired, drained, eyes rimmed with disbelief. I had imagined this company as my professional home. Instead, it had become the scene of my quiet eviction. The HR phrasing echoed in my head. "This decision is independent of your performance." As if that sentence could erase the years I'd given, the nights I'd spent fixing code no one else understood. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles went white, waiting for anger to come. But what came first wasn't anger. It was confusion, a stunned disbelief that this could happen to someone who had done everything right. On the drive home, the city blurred past my windows like a film I wasn't part of. My thoughts drifted, from practical panic to cold calculation. I had rent due next week, my mother's care bills due next month. My savings weren't built for emergencies this large, but beneath the fear, a strange stillness began to form, a layer of focus that felt unfamiliar and dangerous, the kind of focus that comes only when you have nothing left to protect. At home, I placed the HR envelope on my kitchen table and stared at it. The living room around me looked like evidence of the life I'd postponed. Half-read books, unopened paint supplies, a framed degree from a time when I still believed hard work equaled security. Fitzgerald, my aging cat, jumped onto the table and knocked the envelope to the floor. I let it stay there. Somehow, that small act of disregard felt like defiance. I poured myself a glass of water and sat by the window, replaying the meeting in my head. The way Lydia's tone softened only when mentioning the company's evolving needs. It wasn't evolution, it was erasure, and yet, under the humiliation, something new stirred. A thought that if they could erase me so easily, maybe I could disappear on my own terms. Maybe I could make that disappearance mean something. I picked up my phone and scrolled aimlessly through old messages, not sure what I was looking for. Then I saw one name I hadn't thought about in months. Rachel Kim, my longest client, my biggest ally, the one who had trusted me with projects no one else could handle. My finger hovered over her contact for a moment, then stopped. Not yet. Tonight, I needed to feel the weight of what had been taken. Tomorrow, I would decide how to take it back. The next morning, sunlight streamed across my kitchen table, cutting through the stack of papers I hadn't touched. I hadn't slept much. My mind kept looping back to Lydia's voice, the phrasing, the emptiness of it. But as the first real quiet hours of morning settled, the humiliation that had paralyzed me the night before began to harden into something else, a need to understand. I opened my laptop, checked the company intranet, and saw it. My profile already archived, access restricted. 18 years condensed into a grayed-out user ID. I stared at the screen until my phone vibrated beside me. A single message lit up from Bryn, an old colleague who'd left last year after her own departmental restructuring. The text read, "Heard what happened. You should know, it wasn't restructuring. CEO's son starts Monday, fresh MBA, good luck." For a second, I couldn't breathe. My first reaction wasn't rage, it was disbelief, a pure refusal to accept that this was real. But Bryn wouldn't risk that kind of message unless she knew it was true. Ethan Vale. I remembered him vaguely from holiday events, all designer suits and restless arrogance. He was the kind who mistook inherited privilege for potential. The room seemed to tilt slightly as the truth sank in. I hadn't been replaced for strategy. I'd been replaced for bloodline. The anger that finally came wasn't loud. It arrived like a clean flame, sharp and deliberate. I found myself walking around the apartment, picking things up without reason, needing movement. My cat followed me from room to room, tail flicking with curiosity. By the time I stopped, my pulse had settled into a steady rhythm that felt almost mechanical. I realized then that I wasn't powerless. They had fired an employee, but they had underestimated the architect of the system itself. Every analytic model, every data framework, every client relationship. They were all products of my design. My loyalty had been their protection. My absence would be their exposure. I opened my email and reread my client list, names that represented millions in annual revenue. One stood out more than the others, Rachel Kim at NovaFrame Analytics. We'd built our collaboration from nothing, through late nights and high-risk projections that had doubled her company's market share. She once told me, half joking, "Zoe, you're the only reason I sleep through quarterly reviews." I wondered what she'd say now if she knew the truth. By noon, I was pacing the living room, drafting messages in my head but deleting them before they reached the screen. There was a difference between emotion and execution, and I couldn't afford to blur the line. Instead, I called Bryn. She answered immediately, her voice low like she expected to be overheard. "They've been grooming him for months," she whispered. "The deal was sealed weeks ago. You were never meant to know until it was done." I thanked her quietly. There was no point in venting. I needed clarity, not sympathy. When the call ended, I sat at my desk and pulled out a notebook I hadn't touched in years. I began writing, not plans for revenge, but an inventory of value. Every process I'd built, every proprietary method, every client contact who trusted me more than the brand behind my business card. As I filled the pages, the fear that had haunted me the night before began to loosen. The company had replaced me, but they hadn't replaced the mind that built their empire. That realization was both liberating and terrifying, because it meant the next move was mine, and this time I would make it count. By the time I called Rachel, my voice had steadied into something calm, almost professional, though inside I felt the hum of quiet defiance. She picked up on the second ring, her tone warm but cautious. "Zoe, everything okay with next week's strategy session?" I hesitated. "Not exactly. I wanted to give you a heads up before someone else does. My role at Helliverse has been restructured." Silence, long and heavy, filled the line. "Restructured?" she repeated. I could practically hear her analyzing what wasn't being said. I told her enough to explain, not enough to sound bitter. When I finished, she exhaled sharply. "Where are you right now?" "In my car, outside the office." "Stay there. I'll be there in 25 minutes. She didn't ask if I wanted to talk. She decided we would. 27 minutes later, her hybrid slid into the parking lot. She stepped out in her usual composed way. Immaculate navy suit, calm eyes that saw more than people expected. We crossed to the cafe across the street without speaking, just the sound of heels against pavement and the faint buzz of traffic. Inside, she ordered 2 coffees neither of us touched. When she finally spoke, her voice had softened, but the words were surgical. "They've been preparing for this, haven't they?" I looked at her, startled by her certainty. "You knew." "Suspected," she said, folding her hands. "We've been getting strange signals, processes changing, unfamiliar names copied on our deliverables. And recently, someone tried to introduce us to a new point of contact. Young guy, Ethan something." The name landed like a bruise. Rachel nodded slowly. "So it's true." She took a measured sip of coffee and leaned forward. "I'll tell you something you probably already guessed. NovaFrame didn't stay with Heliverse because of its brand reputation. We stayed because of you." Her words hit harder than she could have known. For years, I'd buried every part of myself under professionalism, but hearing her say it out loud gave shape to something I hadn't dared to admit, that my loyalty had built more value for them than it ever did for me. "Our master agreement renews in 70 days, she continued. "We've had 4 competitors approach us recently. The only reason we didn't entertain their offers was trust. Trust in your methods, in your mind." I swallowed hard. And now? Now I'm debating whether to expand or build internal capacity, but I prefer a third option: retain you directly as a strategic advisor. The words hung there like a lifeline wrapped in barbed wire. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt torn between relief and dread. "That would mean leaving Heliverse entirely," I said quietly. "That would mean recognizing where your loyalty belongs," she corrected. I stared through the window at the gray Chicago skyline, the city that had taken and remade me a dozen times. Leaving felt both inevitable and impossible. "I need time to think," I said finally. "Of course, but don't take too long. Business loyalty evaporates faster than goodwill." Her smile was kind but serious. I walked her back to her car, the wind slicing across the parking lot, sharp with early spring cold. When she drove away, I stood there for a moment, watching the taillights disappear into traffic. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger had burned itself out and left something stronger behind, a plan beginning to take shape. They had taken my title, my office, my income. But what they didn't know was that I still held the one thing they couldn't buy back: the trust of the people who mattered most. And that, I realized, was leverage. When I walked back into Heliverse the following Monday, it felt like stepping into an alternate reality. My nameplate had been removed from the frosted glass door upstairs, and a new one had appeared 2 floors down: Zoe Hartman, Junior Market Analyst. The title looked almost mocking against the beige cubicle wall. Around me, chatter paused, then resumed in the low, uneasy way people speak when they don't want to be caught staring. I kept my shoulders straight, my expression calm, and nodded to a few who couldn't decide whether to pity or avoid me. The HR paperwork said I'd graciously accepted a new role to support departmental realignment. The truth was, I'd accepted a front-row seat to their collapse. My first morning was pure theater. A man named Elliot, 12 years younger and painfully self-conscious about training someone who had once led teams he now reported to, guided me through my orientation. His voice trembled as he read from a laminated script. I thanked him politely, pretended to take notes, and asked no questions that would expose how much I already knew. It was easier to let him think I was humbled. People underestimate you faster when they think you've fallen. By the time he finished explaining access protocols, I already knew exactly what I had and what they had stripped away. My account permissions were limited, but I still had visibility into the analytics dashboard, at least at the surface level. I could see reports, not edit them. That was enough. I didn't need control anymore. I needed evidence. That afternoon, I texted Rachel. "I'm in. We'll proceed carefully." She replied within seconds. "Understood. Let's coordinate offline." From that moment, 2 lives began running in parallel, the visible one inside the office and the invisible one after hours. Days blurred into a quiet rhythm of observation. Ethan Vale, my successor, moved through the halls like a man convinced gravity didn't apply to him. He wore confidence like armor, but it was too new, too polished, the kind of confidence that cracks when tested. I saw him once in the cafeteria, animatedly explaining a modernized client optimization protocol to a group of interns who nodded like disciples. His language was all buzzwords, no comprehension of what the algorithms actually did. I recognized one of the models he was describing. Mine, only misquoted and stripped of context. It was like hearing someone hum a symphony out of tune. At first, I intended to keep my distance, to simply observe and wait. But patterns began emerging. System errors, missed benchmarks, client complaints filtered through hushed conversations. I stayed late under the pretense of catching up, quietly documenting every anomaly I noticed. By week 3, the predictive framework that had once defined Heliverse's reputation was already fracturing under Ethan's modifications. He replaced key variables to streamline operations, ignoring the multi-layer dependencies I'd built to maintain regulatory compliance across industries. His version of progress was a shortcut toward failure. Watching it unravel should have satisfied me, but instead it made me restless. Chaos was dangerous if left untamed. I needed to steer it. Each night after leaving the office, I'd drive across the river to meet Rachel and her team in a rented co-working space. There, surrounded by whiteboards and the soft hum of servers, we began reconstructing everything Heliverse was quietly destroying. I laid out the architecture of my frameworks, the nuances of the algorithms, the why behind each design decision. It wasn't revenge, it was reclamation. We were building a parallel system, independent, secure, and perfectly tuned to NovaFrame's expanding needs. The work gave me a strange serenity. For the first time, I wasn't working to prove my worth to someone else. I was building something that would belong entirely to me. Back at the office, Ethan's project updates became increasingly defensive. He blamed integration delays, external vendors, anything but his own shortcuts. I listened silently during team briefings, pretending to take notes, and caught the flicker of panic behind his smile. He didn't realize yet that his optimization was about to implode in front of the one client who could end his career before it began. I knew because Rachel had already filed her complaint with senior leadership, requesting a review of the account's service quality. Her email, carefully worded and timed, triggered the one thing Heliverse feared most: an audit from its highest-paying client. When the internal memo announcing the emergency client meeting hit my inbox, no one looked at me directly. They whispered, speculated, pitied, feared. I didn't correct them. I spent that night revisiting my old notes, tightening every detail of the system I'd built, preparing for questions that hadn't been asked yet. I wasn't angry anymore. I was patient, the kind of patience that sharpens, that waits for the right moment to become action. When it came, I intended to be ready, not to destroy them out of spite, but to show them what happens when the person you underestimated decides to stop protecting you. The morning of the meeting, the office buzzed with the kind of tension that hums just below audibility. I arrived early, as I always had, though this time I wasn't leading anything. My new desk neighbor, a 20-something analyst named Jamie, whispered that the blue frame account meltdown had executives panicking. She didn't realize I was the ghost behind that account's history. At 10 sharp, I walked to the 15th floor, the one I used to call home, where the executive conference room overlooked the Chicago skyline like a throne room for corporate judgment. My invitation had been last minute. Someone in leadership must have remembered that I once managed the very system now crumbling. I took a seat at the far end of the table. No one greeted me. That was fine. I wasn't there for acknowledgement. I was there for the end. Ethan arrived 2 minutes late, carrying his laptop like a trophy. He smiled, that polished kind of smile reserved for people who mistake confidence for competence. The VP followed, his expression stretched thin with anxiety. Then came Rachel, accompanied by NovaFrame's CFO and legal counsel. Their presence changed the air instantly. Conversations died. Everyone straightened their posture as though gravity had increased. Rachel's calm was surgical, her tone precise. "We've experienced a severe decline in data accuracy and responsiveness over the past month," she began. "Critical reports have been delayed. Several analyses contained errors we cannot afford during an expansion phase." Ethan jumped in before the VP could respond, explaining that these were normal integration hiccups and that legacy frameworks often resist modernization. Rachel didn't look at him. Legacy frameworks, she repeated evenly. Is that what you call the system that doubled our market share in 3 years? Her gaze moved to me at the end of the table. Zoe, would you confirm who designed that framework originally? The room turned toward me like a single organism. I kept my voice steady. I did. Over 5 years, with input from your analytics division and regulatory partners. A brief silence followed. The VP's jaw tightened. Zoe, those systems are proprietary assets of Helliverse. Let's avoid mischaracterizations. Rachel ignored him completely. Those proprietary assets no longer function as designed. We've reviewed the data architecture. It's been altered beyond recognition. She reached into her folder and pulled out a bound report, sliding copies across the table. Here's our assessment. It details every deviation from our compliance parameters, every point of data loss, every instance of failed oversight. Ethan's face drained as he skimmed the first pages. These are isolated bugs, he stammered. We're addressing them. Rachel didn't blink. We disagree, and we're restructuring our contract accordingly. The VP leaned forward. What kind of restructuring? Rachel's tone remained calm. Reducing scope by 45% effective immediately. The remainder will transition to a new consulting arrangement under independent advisement. She didn't say my name, but she didn't need to. Everyone in that room knew who that advisor was. The VP's eyes darted toward me, searching for something. Guilt, perhaps, or hesitation. I offered him nothing. Ethan shuffled his papers in a panic, trying to recover control. If you'd consulted us before implementing this change, Rachel cut him off with a quiet authority that made the entire room still. We consulted the only person who's ever understood our needs. Her gaze found me again, not as an employee, but as an equal. The weight of that acknowledgement filled the space more powerfully than any title ever could. The VP cleared his throat, trying to salvage dignity. Perhaps we should discuss reinstating Zoe's former role to ensure continuity. His voice was thin, desperate. I met his eyes, calm and detached. That won't be necessary. I'm exactly where the company decided I belong. A few executives looked away, ashamed. Others watched with the dawning comprehension of what they had destroyed. Rachel gathered her materials and stood. We'll await your confirmation on the revised agreement. Thank you for your time. As she and her team exited, the silence left behind was suffocating. I rose, adjusted my blazer, and left without another word. Behind me, I heard the VP mutter something about damage control. They would soon discover there was no control left to salvage. The following morning, I was summoned to the VP's office. His assistant's email called it a private discussion, but I already knew the script. They wanted to undo the damage not out of remorse, but survival. The VP stood as I entered, forcing a strained smile. Zoe, please sit. I want to speak frankly. The blinds behind him were half drawn, light slicing across his face like interrogation lines. We may have moved too quickly with the restructuring, he began, using the corporate language of regret without apology. Your institutional knowledge is clearly more valuable than we accounted for. We'd like to reinstate you, with an elevated title and a significant raise. He paused for effect, studying me. You'd report directly to me. There's even talk of an equity package. I waited for him to finish. The tone, the posture, the fake warmth. It was the same performance I'd seen him give to clients when trying to sell a failing project. It wasn't about me. It was about leverage. And what would you expect in return? I asked. His jaw twitched slightly. We'd need your help restoring the NovaFrame account to full scope. They still trust you. If you could reassure them, perhaps even assist in transitioning the system back under our management, I believe we could rebuild the partnership. There it was, the real motive. They didn't want to fix the culture or own their mistakes. They just wanted the money back. I felt a flicker of irony at how predictable it all was. They'd stripped me of authority, erased my work, and handed it to a nepotism hire, yet now they were offering everything I'd ever asked for, as long as I helped them clean up the mess their arrogance created. I stood slowly, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make him uneasy. "I appreciate the offer," I said evenly, "but my role now doesn't include client management. I'll defer to whoever you've appointed for that responsibility." His expression faltered, then hardened. "Zoe, this could be a turning point for all of us. You don't have to make this difficult." I almost smiled. "I'm not making it difficult. I'm following the structure you put in place." I turned toward the door. "You were right about one thing," I added before leaving. "You did underestimate my value." The door clicked shut behind me with the quiet finality of a chapter ending. As I walked down the hall, I felt no triumph, no adrenaline rush, just an unshakable calm. For years, I'd fought for validation from people who never intended to give it. Now I didn't need their acknowledgement. They'd built their empire on the assumption I'd always protect it. They never imagined what would happen when I stopped. I resigned the following Friday. No announcement, no farewell email, just a signed letter left on HR's desk and a clean, quiet exit through the lobby I had walked for nearly 2 decades. By then, rumors were already circulating about BlueFrame's final decision. I didn't need confirmation. I knew the moment I stepped into the spring air that Heliverse's grip on that account, and on me, was finished. As I crossed the river, my phone buzzed with a message from Rachel. "Approved. New contract signed. Congratulations, partner." The word lingered. Not employee, not consultant, partner. I pulled over and let the weight of it sink in. The following weeks unfolded with a rhythm I'd forgotten life could have. Work that once consumed nights and weekends now fit within hours that left room for sunlight, books, even laughter. I built my new firm, DataForge Analytics, on the same principles that had once been dismissed as too meticulous at Heliverse. Within 3 months, we expanded, hiring 2 analysts from my old team who'd quietly reached out after the implosion. The reports from inside were grim, revenue down 28%, morale in free fall. Ethan had resigned, citing personal reasons. The VP was transitioning to advisory capacity, corporate speak for being shown the door. I didn't celebrate. I didn't need to. Some endings are loud, others are simply complete. One afternoon, I met Rachel for coffee near the river where it had all begun. She raised her cup with a small smile. "You got your revenge," she said. I shook my head. "No, I got my freedom." The words felt truer than anything I'd said in years. Revenge fades. Freedom rewrites you. As we watched the city lights reflect against the water, I realized I'd finally done what they never expected. I built something they couldn't take. Looking back, I realized that revenge was never really about destroying someone else's career. It was about reclaiming my own worth after I had let others define it for too long. When they demoted me, I thought I'd lost everything that mattered. What I really lost was the illusion that loyalty guarantees respect. That's a painful truth a lot of people learn the hard way. We grow up believing that if we work hard, play fair, and keep our heads down, someone up top will notice. But the corporate world isn't built on fairness. It's built on leverage, relationships, and perception. Once you understand that, you stop waiting for validation and start owning your value. My quiet revenge was never about humiliating anyone. It was about refusing to keep feeding a system that rewarded incompetence and nepotism. Ethan and the VP didn't just lose a client, they lost the person who made them look competent. Their downfall wasn't dramatic. It was administrative, inevitable, and silent. That's the kind of justice real life delivers. In life, not every betrayal needs a war. Sometimes walking away with your integrity intact is the heaviest consequence you can hand out. Other times, silence cuts deeper than confrontation. What this experience taught me is that forgiveness isn't weakness, it's freedom. Forgiving doesn't mean excusing what they did. It means no longer carrying the weight of their actions on your back. But make no mistake, forgiveness doesn't always mean kindness. Sometimes forgiveness is self-liberation, and sometimes silence is the sharpest knife. How to get started today. Write down 3 professional or personal boundaries you refuse to let anyone cross again. Identify one skill or strength you've been undervaluing and decide how to make it visible. Cut ties, mentally or physically, with one toxic situation you've been rationalizing. Reach out to someone who recognizes your value and start a genuine conversation about future collaboration. If this story made you reflect on your own turning point, share it below. I'd love to hear how you reclaimed your worth after being underestimated. And if you found this message meaningful, subscribe and stay with me, because sometimes the best revenge is simply building a better life on your own terms.